All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. We're going to talk to my friend Ladan Jiracek today again, and he has traveled across the world and works on neural implants. So I wanted to talk to him about topics like AI because that's a thing I've been thinking about a lot lately and having interesting conversations with people about, and also languages because I know you know at least a few languages, and I've been learning Italian lately, and I only fairly recently found out about language families, which I think would be interesting to talk about. So, yeah, why don't you just start off by kind of telling everyone a little bit about yourself there?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be on the show again. My name's Ladan. I'm the host of the Travel Wisdom podcast and the Neural Implant podcast. And so the first one, Travel Wisdom, is about how traveling can be more than. Are you lighting up a bowl right now? Dude, that's awesome.
Yep,
Bong, right?
yep.
Nice. Oh, sweet. Okay, so
More like Joe Rogan.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, we would be in the same room if it was Joe Rogan, but yeah.
True, true.
Um, but yeah, totally. So I like to travel a lot. I've traveled to like 100 countries, and as Andrew said, I love to learn languages. So I speak I guess we can call French too. Like I'm sometimes nervous to like count that as a language in case somebody like tries to test me, but I can handle a little bit and I've had some like hour-long conversations. So, yeah. But I also do the Neural Implant podcast, and I've actually been working at the University of Florida as a laboratory technician in the neuroprostheses lab, and basically working on brain implants and neural implants. So, yeah, that's basically my story, like trying to still figure out how to bring these two things together because they're completely different things, like backpacking the world, living under a bridge, and like sticking stuff in people's brains. So I'm wondering like what's the common thread there, and I still got to figure that out.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you saw it, but I recently watched that Joe Rogan podcast with Elon Musk, and I thought it was interesting noticing what Dusty, who's in mixed mental arts for people who don't know, was telling me about it before I watched it, which was that Elon Musk talks about how there it's almost like inevitable that there's going to be kind of this merging between human biology and technology, like cybernetics or whatever you would call it. And I guess that's related to what you're working on, neural implants, right? And I remember the first time we talked, we were talking about how, well, one of the main reasons that you work on that is that you think that that's probably going to be like the most likely path that we go on in the future.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, in that interview, Elon was talking about how. So he actually has a company that's doing exactly what I'm doing. So, or like what I'm studying. It's called Neuralink, and they want to make a neural lace. So basically, connecting into the brain, and his reasoning is that if we can like control, or if we're part of the robots as they take over the world, then probably they won't kill us. So yeah, I mean, sure, that works. I guess that's a legitimate line of reasoning. My thinking on it is, I mean, first of all, it's cool, but second of all, there's something that really excites me. It's called bioelectronic medicine or electroceuticals, and basically instead of pharmaceuticals and drugs, like flooding your body, and just you want to have something going on in your pancreas, or you want like one of your kidneys to start doing something or stop doing something that's you know bad or good, and so you take this drug which affects your whole body. And basically what this is doing is, instead of doing that, you can just send a signal with your neurons, which your whole body, all your organs are connected with neurons, with cells, and your brain controls all that on a conscious and subconscious level. And yeah, so basically this will replace all of that. This will replace all of pharmaceuticals. So this is my hope. This is actually why I'm doing it, is because I don't like the pharmaceutical industry, and I'd rather that they disappear. And if we can replace it with something that's 100 times bigger, better, faster, cheaper, why not? Let's do it. So that's why I'm doing it, and that's my grand vision of things. And then I'm also doing like the media of it, like giving attention to it and explaining things to, I guess, a lay audience as well.
So, so two questions. One, so is the idea to kind of be able to just with your brain, maybe consciously or with some sort of attached device or something to boost your natural levels of whatever the drug is supposed to increase in your body or something? And also, why do you hate the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, so I mean that definitely is a possibility, is to increase memory, increase like recall. So you literally like download Google Translate in your brain and you like speak fluent Turkish, then you're just like, "Oh, I've never learned Turkish," but you know it because it's just streaming from the cloud as it's going. And that
Like the
honestly, that
Matrix?
exact like literally exactly like the Matrix. So that technology is not too different than what I'm talking about. And basically if you figure out one, then you've kind of figured out like 80% of the other one. So it's mostly there, so it's not that big of a leap. And then for the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, like, what's not to hate? Like, they're $1 trillion a year industry that's like raping old women, figuratively, financially, probably not literally, but you understand what I mean. And they're charging insane amounts of money, and they have patents and for like 20 years or something like this, and they could have a monopoly on it. True, it does cost a lot of money to get something FDA approved, and it's like $1 billion with a B, $1 billion, $1,000 million to get something approved. So of course,
I
when they
didn't
get
know
something,
that.
yeah, oh, it's so much. Of course, when they get something approved, they want to milk it for as much as possible. So it's kind of the whole system, honestly. And the beauty with this, what I'm working on, is it's a medical device, and medical devices are categorized differently than drugs. So the hurdles are much less, are much lower. So instead of $1 billion, to get through, to get approval, it's on the order of $10 million. So it's 100 times cheaper to get something approved, and
Wow.
it's 100 times faster. Like you could literally turn it off, turn it on. There's no side effects. There's just tons of really nice things about it. So I'm want to be like an evangelizer of this, and I'm working on it.
I will do all I can to help you with that for my own, partially for my own self-interest, because it sounds awesome to just be like, hey, I want to learn jujitsu. Let's just get a brain download of that or something.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about it too. It's just like later we'll have, the purists, the hipsters, the knowledge hipsters that are like, no man, I learned jujitsu the old fashioned way. I'll be like, what? You mean you didn't download it? You didn't just like stream the knowledge? Oh man, like that's so crazy. That must have taken like years. Like, yeah, it did. It didn't take 5 seconds like with you. So yeah, it'll be crazy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I bet that will happen too. Like, you didn't really learn jujitsu though. Yeah, but I could still roll with you and do really well, so it doesn't make a difference. I don't
Yeah.
know. That brings up a lot of interesting questions. But so is there kind of like you mentioned the $10 million and opposed to the $1 billion. So is there some sort of equivalent to the FDA for neural implants like that
Uh,
kind?
it would be through the FDA as well. Actually, it's Food
Oh,
and
okay.
Drug
Okay.
Administrator. It would be approved through them, and that would be it's a medical device. So it's essentially like, I don't know, pacemaker or catheter or anything else that you might put into your body or on your body. Honestly, like band-aids, I think fall under the same thing, and like IVs and all this kind of stuff. They're all under this same broad category.
So band-aids have to be approved by the FDA?
I don't know actually. I can look this up real fast, but yeah, I mean, it's along these lines, like that. I guess hmm, maybe if it was like stitched in or something like this, maybe like that, something that the doctor has to apply, then something along those lines.
Oh, okay. That seems crazy. Like, I mean, I understand how there can always be problems in manufacturing where people do people might do malicious things, but with something as simple as like band-aids, I find that do band-aids require $1 billion to get approved?
No, no, definitely not. And I mean,
Oh, okay.
as you might imagine, that would mean band-aids are not, 5 cents a piece. They're
Oh, right.
thousands of dollars a piece. No, and it looks like there's an exemption for this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's like skin protectant and all this kind of stuff. So no, there's exemptions and all this, but it's just as I'm saying, like as I'm showing you, I'm telling you right now, there's big like legal loopholes or legal issues with everything. So yeah, it's perfect for lawyers, which means again, it'll be very expensive.
Right. Oh, okay. So we might have talked about this when we talked before. I don't remember for sure, but I think it's interesting. I've been talking with a bunch of other people lately about this kind of concept that it seems like a lot of people talk about really now, which I first heard from. I think I first heard about this idea when the guy Naval Ravikant, who's kind of an angel investor who's also a bit of a polymath, I would say, who talked to Tim Ferriss on his podcast, was pointing out, I guess actually from where I was at that point, because I had read Super Intelligence, that book by Nick Bostrom about the kind of Skynet scenario of AI. And so I kind of went along with that narrative, but Naval Ravikant pointed out that it's like it's like people have two different ideologies about AI. There's the Skynet scenario that AI will kill us all and destroy humanity, or there's the singularity scenario where, hey man, like technology will save us all and it'll put us into a utopia. So I don't remember whether I asked you about that before, but I'm curious about what you think about that sort of idea.
Yeah, this sounds familiar. I remember talking about this with somebody from the MMA group, but I mean, my idea is that when you think that AI is going to destroy you, you're essentially humanizing it. You're personifying it. You're saying like, okay, it's going to act like a human, but really it acts. It's completely different than human thought. It's the same way that birds and airplanes don't fly the same way. Airplanes don't flap their wings. They have like motors that are spinning at thousands of RPM, and that's how they fly. So it's completely different, and we may not really get to human ways of thinking for a very, very long time. I think it was only like 10 years ago that they like literally built a machine that's like a bird that like flaps its wing that can actually fly. So that might be very far off. It's really going to be more of the same, and that's what I believe with everything. Like really, things don't ever change. They just get more of the same, or they just get faster. It's just a multiplier. So it's just going to be like what we have now. I mean, like the internet and SMS and calling people and everything like this. Like that existed kind of. I mean, you could like yell across the valley, or you'd talk to somebody, across the table or something like this. But then just kind of multiplies. Like how far can you do it? Oh, now it's not like across the valley that you can like be like, hey, come eat your potatoes. You can call somebody across the world. Not that that's useful to call somebody in Thailand to be like, hey, come eat potatoes with me. But yeah, I mean, like it's just more of the same. So I think it's going to be like that. Like things are just going to get a lot simpler, lot more, I don't know, automated. So Uber, like just, hey, I want a taxi. Come over here. Boom, taxi shows up, and it's very clear where it is. The ETA, who the person is. It's just going to be more of that. It's going to be more of that on all different types of levels. I really hope that the governmental level is going to come eventually. But yeah, I think that's honestly what it's going to be. And then, what's in 100 years? Who knows? Like at that point, I don't think anybody can really tell. But at that point, I think it might be like the computers would have built kind of a utopia for us, and they're like, okay, we're going to go do our own thing, but you guys stay here, and with minimal of our resources, with minimal effort from us, we're going to keep an Ethiopia utopia for you, and you just frolic. That's your job, is to frolic, and then we'll go figure out life's mysteries and all this kind of stuff. I think that's what it's going to be. um you know I think it's inevitable too, and people are like, oh, we should like legislate it, or we should ban it or something like this. And I'm just like, that's literally the stupidest idea ever. Is because if you make AI studies, if you make like super intelligent studies criminal, then guess who's going to be studying it?
Criminal.
Criminals. Boom. Oh my God. And is that good or is that bad? Is that going to lead to a benefit to humanity, or is that going to be bad? Of course, that's going to be horrible. So like let's have the best and brightest minds, the most altruistic, the nicest people do it, and then their part of the personality is going to be like stuck into that, and it's going to be a part of that technology is going to be written in, and it's going to be good versus criminal.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like like generally speaking, when you make something illegal, like you make it less safe than it is when it is legal, and you kind of shut down innovation in a way, like you were talking about. Like Canada recently, we just finally legalized weed, and the when I was looking at the Cannabis Act, the whole idea behind it was basically to prevent children from having easier access to drugs. That is a convenient political way to sell it, but it's also true. Like when you have a legalized and regulated market and you need to show ID to buy a drug, it makes it a lot more difficult for kids to get access to that drug than it is if they can just go to any drug dealer who doesn't check their ID.
Exactly. Like business licenses are on the line, livelihoods are on the line. Like a lot of money's on the line to make sure that people, check the ID and everything like this. And I've heard this that a lot of like high schoolers or a lot of young people, it's easier for them, or was easier than for them to score weed than it was to get alcohol, because they just had to know a guy, for the weed, and it just happened. But yeah, I guess the alcohol was more difficult.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, they like the government learned that lesson with alcohol prohibition too, obviously. So I was curious about something you said there. How would the changes that you were talking about in terms of technology? You mentioned government. So how would that change sort of work with government in your mind?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I was kind of toying around with this idea of wiki govern for a long time. Basically, people write their own legislation, people write their own rules, and just like Wikipedia, you can edit it and be like, "Hey, let's make the bridges this and this way," and the people who know things about that, they agree on that, and they say, "Yeah, we should do that." And if somebody comes in like, "Oh, blah blah blah, spam spam spam," then they can block them, or they can be like, that's clearly not useful. So it's just kind of like an agreement by the peers, and honestly, it would be only the people that are interested in something like that. National park preservation in North Carolina, not many people are interested in that. Probably people from North Carolina are going to be interested in that, but you have those people make the laws. So the next step above that, and I'm still wondering if that's going to be a good idea. But the next step above that would be to have the AI make it. Be like, okay, based on your guys' preferences, based on what we've seen and how we know that humans work, we think that this is going to be. We think this is the ideal, and this is how we're going to fund it. This is how we're going to allocate energy to it. And yeah, I don't know. It's just going to be like a lot more automatic. Voting. Legislation. It's just going to be kind of automatic, and it'll just work. There won't have to be I don't know, people like pulling the switches and replying to the emails and doing all this kind of stuff. That it'll just be automated. So yeah, I think that'll be good. I don't know if you've seen Wally, where I mean it's kind of a dystopian movie, but at the same time, you're going around on their like little highways or whatever, their little wheelchair highways, and somebody falls down, and like the police come, and the ambulance like robots come, and they clean it up, and they scrub the floor and do all this kind of stuff. That's gonna happen. Like that's probably what's gonna happen. Like you're gonna have like ambulance robots come over and scrub the floor, pick everybody up, and all this kind of stuff when stuff happens, which will be almost never. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's gonna be all automated robots. That's gonna be amazing.
That'd be cool if it turns out the way you think. I want it to happen that way too. That would be pretty cool. I remember you bringing up WikiGovern on one of the previous Mixed Mental Arts chats, actually. You think that so you think that in the future, if the AIs control everything, will it be, and you use the word utopia, would it be the case that we can just like, do things that we enjoy with our lives? And do you think that, especially if the AI is doing their own sort of wiki govern thing and changing the laws as they go along, that one of the ways that they could keep doing their own thing, as you were talking about, and let us just still have a functioning society and help us with that? Do you think that they would do something like a universal basic income so people can make a living while just doing what they want to do instead of having to have jobs?
Yeah, I think so. I honestly think so. So I think that the life in the future with AI is going to be like an episode of Friends. I mean, you've seen this episode, or you've seen this show, or How I Met Your Mother, to do something slightly newer. How much working are they doing in those shows? Not a lot. Like maybe 10% of the episode is devoted to working. The rest is like relationships, hanging out, doing crazy, shenanigans and all this kind of stuff. That's going to be life. And everybody's going to have to kind of get used to that, is a Friends type of life. And honestly, that's kind of what humans are built to do more. They're not really built to work 40 hours a week. I mean, they found that the hunter-gatherer tribes, they work like 15 hours per week, something like that, and the rest is just doing what they do in Friends and doing what they do in How I Met Your Mother. There might be a blue French trombone, or no, sorry, French
French
horn,
horn.
involved in some of these hunter-gatherer societies. Who knows?
I like that you brought up hunter-gatherer societies. That's what I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking about. What you were talking about, that how a lot of people like Chris Ryan, for example, in his book Sex at Dawn, talk about that, how hunter-gatherer societies, um, before agriculture, had much shorter work weeks, and it seemed like that led to a lot of positive results. I mean, there are pros and cons to both hunter-gatherer societies and agricultural societies, but I think that's a really great thing too. And I think also, I'm glad that you brought up How I Met Your Mother, because that has the Emperor Brian Callen in some of the episodes. Also, I really like that show. My brother's an even bigger fan of that than me. But anyway, with yeah, I think that would be really cool too for the future to turn out that way. And I know that the common argument against this sort of idea is that if people can just do what they want, then they'll feel depressed because they won't have any goals to work towards. But I mean, obviously, not everyone is the same way, and some people require more external structure in their lives, like they don't have aspirations of being an artist or something like that, and they just want to do like a job in the trades or something. But I think that if people have the freedom to do what they want to do and they can pursue a passion, then you can achieve goals and spend your life focusing on achieving those goals. And it can give you more fulfillment in life too. Like if I had the option to do that right now, I totally would. I just can't financially. But if I could just focus on all the creative things that I love to do all the time and all the things that I love to learn about, then I would totally do that. So I really like your idea behind that.
Yeah, I mean, our friend on Mixed Mental Arts, actually, Spencer Mike Spencer Bound.
Yeah.
He's written a book. I mean, it's not published actually, but it's exactly about this, is like this post scarcity society, and it's like this utopia, maybe we can call it, is populated with shops that just like are very creative shops. It's like it's the woodworking shop, and true, you can get like everything for free, but it's kind of like the mass produced version. It's like you can get McDonald's for free, okay, like all the fast food places. But if you want like a homemade foie gras with like this type of dressing and this sauce, and it's like homemade and like from the garden and all this kind of stuff, then that's when you have to pay. And that's when you have to basically go to like a restaurant and use up your credits or whatever. And that's what the people are doing, and they love it. They do it because they like it, not because they have to. And you could live off of McDonald's or whatever, like processed food that they have available just all the time. But if you want the really good stuff, then you do that. And same thing with artwork, or if you want like a nice handcrafted table or something like this, then you would go to the guy who makes the handcrafted tables, and you know, you would be doing these artistic things all the time. So you would be able to do, I don't know, what is actually, what is the thing that you're like, I want to be like a woodworker, I want to be, you know, this thing.
Well, I think more than anything else, it's writing. I would say particularly writing fiction, like writing novels and short stories. There are lots of different creative type of things that I do. Like I love doing podcasts and talking with people like you, like this, which I consider to be a creative pursuit, and making videos about ideas. And I like writing blogs and doing like basically nonfiction work like that too. But I like fiction work slightly more, to the point where if I had to pick one thing that I could do and I had to let go of everything else, I would pick writing novels. That's my favorite thing to do. Like working on my novel that I've been working on for a long time. I'm working on my last edit right now, and it's so it's so exciting to me to just basically get into intuitive mode, and or get into a flow state, and just let the story come out of you and just create an awesome story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty exciting, and I mean, that's something. If you don't count the hours, that's what you're going to be doing. You know, in the poor scare. Like if you had, I don't know, a few $1,000 a month, what would you do? Like if it was just that's the thing that comes out of the sky every a month. Like what are you going to do? Like that's the question. And some people are going to have a really hard time because they're just been raised on Netflix and chill, and maybe they don't even chill. Maybe they just Netflix. Who knows? So.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't know. Like it's really going to be a big crisis for a lot of people. And it's going to be really boring for a lot of people, but for some of us, we're gonna have a great time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds great then. Yeah, I really do hope it turns out that way. And another thing I was thinking about too, in terms of AI, with the kind of doomsday or Skynet scenarios that we were talking about, is that along with you, everyone else I've talked to about who works in these sorts of areas like computer technology or AI or something like that, everyone I know who understands how those systems works have made almost exactly the same point that you did earlier, that these are completely different operating systems. So if the AI is going to get to a point, the point that people are worried about, where it can like use every single last ounce of all of the world's resources to, like Nick Bostrom uses the example in his book of making paper clips, destroying the world by using all of the world's resources to make paper clips. Where it You would have to completely redesign the operating system for that. And also, like you said, even if that does happen, it'll be far into the future. Like even Nick Bostrom, who has that Skynet perspective, says in his book that the the people he talked to who agrees with him that this is going to be a problem think that human level machine learning, or human level super intelligence where it exceeds the ability of humans, isn't going to happen until around the year 2130, I think, if I remember correctly. So even if that does happen, that's going to be far into the future. And if that does happen, then I kind of doubt, maybe it's because I try to be optimistic about it partially, but I kind of doubt that it'll be the case that AI will destroy humanity. Although I do love seeing that idea played out in awesome science fiction movies.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, science fiction movies are going to choose the most extreme scenario because the kind of mediocre scenario is not that interesting. You know, it's not going to be blockbuster. You can't have explosions in that, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Uh, so we were talking. When you were talking about languages earlier, that's one thing we were going to talk about too. What would I might have asked you this before too, but what would you say is your favorite language that you've learned?
Um, I really like German actually. I've really enjoy it. It's kind of like um something that I guess frustrates me with Spanish is it doesn't seem very clear, and there's a lot. I don't know, like scientifically, you can't really describe a lot of things scientifically, or engineering or math or mechanics or something like this. I don't know. It seems very broad in those senses. Maybe I just don't know the words, but in German, uh, it's a lot of times even better than English because, as you might know, you can build words. You can kind of like stick words together, make these compound words. But that's really useful sometimes, and um, it's really nice, and so it's a very, I guess, descriptive language. And if you know how to use it, then you can kind of describe things pretty clearly. So I like it for that reason. But maybe it's not so fun. It's a work language, not a fun language.
Oh, that's interesting. That kind of makes me want to learn it more, especially since it's part of my heritage too, because anyone who knows my last name, Meitzer, can tell that it's German. So, and my dad knows a little bit of German too, but that's one language that I haven't gotten around to learning yet. But it is one that I intend to learn. I mentioned earlier, as we were starting, language families too, which I heard about from Hunter Motz from Mixed Mental Arts, and yeah, I thought that that was so cool when I first heard about that idea because I didn't know it existed. So I've been taking his suggestion and I'm learning Italian right now, but on the Memrise website through Italian for polyglots, for people who want to learn multiple languages. So it's so cool because as you're learning the Italian, you're also, when you see the word or phrase, it also tells you it in the other Romance languages. So it tells you in French, Spanish, and Portuguese, I think. And so I think that's a really cool way of trying to learn languages, especially if you want to use multiple ones. So I wonder, what do you think about that idea of language families, and if you've used it yourself before?
Yeah, I've definitely used it. So I speak Slovak as a native language, as a mother language, and so I learned Russian pretty quickly because of that. And actually, Russian, of all those Slavic languages, Polish, Czech, Yugoslavian, all these, that Russian is the most different. Russian is the most like off to the edge. I've seen some like graphs of how much they overlap or how far they are and everything like this. Um, but yeah, it was really fast. Like I got to conversation level in like 2 3 months, and now I can hold conversations, after 3 4 months of study, like maybe 100 hours of study, and it's very very easy. Like maybe 100 hours of study, and it's incredibly easy, and it's like you get so I look at it like this. So the grammar is free. Like grammar is more or less the same. Like it's really, there's very few tweaks that you have to do. Um, and they're just tweaks. And then a third of the words are like the same, and a third of the words are weird, or like they're just like completely. I mean, so an example in you know Polish, the word for car is samochód, which is like self walker, and so it's like, yeah. I mean, I guess like it makes sense. So I can remember that really quickly because it's like self walker, which is kind of what it does. So it's like a silly thing, or you're just like, oh, that's a really funny word. Um, and then the last third is completely new words. So literally, I would say I have to learn only 40% of the vocabulary, and I'm at a very good level. So yeah, it's really nice. But actually, these are quite different languages. So I think it's maybe only 60% overlap or something like this. Well, as I said, 60% overlap. But something like Spanish and Portuguese, that's like 85% overlap. So
Oh
you only
wow.
have to learn, yeah. So it's what is that, 3 times closer than Slovak and Russian. So it's very very easy. So those are the two, maybe the closest ones. But yeah, I mean, I'm actually kicking around this idea. Like, there's a bunch of Brazilians, at our campus, and I'm just kicking around the idea of just like, man, I'm just gonna spend like 2 3 months and just slam Portuguese and get really good at it. And I think it's very easy. Like once that Spanish, and especially French, Spanish and French, roots are down. Once you got those pretty good, then learning another one of those is much much easier. But it has to be to a very good level, like a high intermediate level, I would say. So you can have a 20-minute conversation with somebody in a bar in only that language, and that's kind of that's kind of the barrier, I guess. Or talk about deforestation for like 5-10 minutes, and so it's not like a beginner level, like hello, I am 7 years old and I like to eat fish, like not that kind of level. That's very low. So you have to, up to the higher level. But then it's very easily done. That translation is done very easily.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm definitely still on the beginner's level and have to get up to the intermediate level in both. Well, I guess I would say in Spanish, Italian, and French, because I I'm definitely still at the beginner level of all three of those, and uh, I only have French is a language that I want to kind of also learn and simultaneously relearn when it's one of the when I get to it as one of the Romance languages that I learn, because in in Canada you learn French as a second language as part of the school system, although I've mostly forgotten it now. But I was noticing, like, for example, my brother posted something on Facebook, which was a joke involving understanding the French words for particular numbers for you to understand the joke. And I was surprised that I remembered those. So maybe they're in my long-term memory to an extent. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen when I learn French again, and if it comes back to me more easily in combination with having already learned Spanish and Italian. I think that that might be the case. And I also noticed what you were talking about too, as I'm learning Italian and then also seeing the Portuguese, French, and Spanish words, that Portuguese and Spanish are really similar, like you were saying. Like the words and phrases are almost identical or sometimes literally identical. So that's an interesting thought about, in terms of what you were saying about Brazilian too, is the Brazilians, that's you said it's French and Spanish, but the language in Brazil, is that Portuguese?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So that might make Portuguese a lot easier then, especially if I learned French before that, having learned Italian and French. So that's really useful to know. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting how there can be such different regional variations of languages too. Like for example, in Canada, there's the really specific regional variation of French in Quebec, which is very different from the French in France, for example. And there are all sorts of other different regional variations like that. Do you know about a whole bunch of those specific regional variations?
Uh, I mean, for French, yeah, I only know about the Quebecois and the France, but that it kind of like got normalized after World War II and after radio and everything like this. It kind of all flattened out and it became Parisian. But definitely in the olden days, it was much more various, and you might not be able to understand what somebody on the other side of the country is saying. And I've run across this as well in German. Sometimes the person I'm speaking to has to almost translate almost like to a different language, to the real German, the formal German, which is what I speak, versus their village German or their German in their state. So it is interesting, and some of these places have stronger dialects. So Spanish, because it does span so much of the world, it's different. It's much different and much more different in different parts of the world. French too, that spans many areas, and many French speakers are second language, in Africa especially. That also affects the accent, of course. Portuguese, yeah, I mean all of these languages actually. Italian, well, and then Italian actually, just within Italy, there's huge differences, and the north understands each other, but then the south is completely different.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Would you say that with the with people in Africa learning French as a second language, for example, is that a historically more recent development for French to be so common in African countries?
I mean, it's a colonial thing. So
Oh, okay.
in the French countries, so like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, like Ivory Coast. Um, I think there's a good amount. You know, Rwanda. I think Burundi as well. Djibouti. They all
That's one
they
of
had
my
French
favorite names
colonists.
for a country, Djibouti.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's interesting how that tends to happen. Yeah. I was just thinking about actually, if you want to, it would be interesting to because I know I've seen I think I've talked to you about this a little bit and seen your Facebook posts about it, about this idea of safe spaces and stuff like that, because I just started reading The Coddling of the American Mind for the next Mixed Mental Arts book club chat on it, and it's really interesting how Jonathan Haidt goes into these ideas with Greg Lukianoff in his book. So if you want to, it'd be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, I saw that book. Or I don't know if I'll have time to do that mixed mental arts chat, but I saw that book and I'm just like, ooh, this looks really cool. So I've put it, on my like to read list. And yeah, unfortunately, I'm a little bit slower now with reading. Um, but yeah, that's definitely on the list.
So what do you think about that whole kind of idea in general? Just this kind of like really radical progressive idea. The way that I was just reading it earlier that they describe it in the book is like a really good example that they give is in the 90s what schools started doing. And I remember this starting to happen when I was a kid in elementary school, because I guess I grew up mostly in the 90s. And I remember the whole process of this happening, where it gradually became the case that you couldn't have peanuts at school at all, and you couldn't have any other types of nuts, or even the way it's gotten today apparently is that you can't have anything manufactured in a plant that also has products with nuts in them, which is the example they brought up in the book. And they use that as a way to illustrate the one of the three untruths that they talk about in the book, which is what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. So the idea is to go away from things that cause you fear or make you uncomfortable, and that's why since there's been this mass increase in schools banning all types of nut products entirely, there's been a massive increase in people getting peanut allergies, because when you don't have any exposure whatsoever to the things that make you uncomfortable, then perhaps, like for the example with peanuts, you might develop an allergy even if you were not going to otherwise, because you have not had any exposure at all, which goes against the idea in cognitive behavioral therapy of, for example, even soldiers with PTSD, gradually exposing them to the type of trauma that kind of triggers their PTSD because it reminds them of war. So that's like the whole idea, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. That's the same idea as hormesis. And hormesis is a biological term for, a little bit of a poison is a good thing and actually makes your body stronger. And then you have more and then it like that drops, that effectivity drops. But it's the same thing with exercise. Like if you look at the biomarkers after somebody's exercised really hard, you're like, stop that. Don't ever do that. Whatever he just did is like the worst idea ever. You have stress markers, like everything's messed up. So don't ever exercise is what the naive person might say. But as we all know, like you need to exercise. And of course, a little bit is good. But of course, a lot can be bad and you can like overtrain and you can hurt yourself and you can literally drive yourself to death, doing that. So I think everything's like that. Like a lot of society is actually kind of a biological system and has many biological principles, fundamentals. And so I think it's definitely like that. Sociology as well. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's the thing is, again, something that Mike Spencer Brown talks about, is a lot of times the thing that we're trying to fix, whatever we do, our fixes is actually, it makes it worse. And that should be your first inclination. That should be your first thing that you think about, is like, how do I know that I'm actually not making this worse? How do I know that by protecting somebody, I'm actually not causing more harm? And that's honestly what happens most of the time. And maybe it doesn't happen, but like that secondary effect, that secondary effect also causes harm. So maybe you help somebody a little bit, but then that secondary effect, it flips back right at you and hurts you. But then you got that third effect, that tertiary effect, and maybe that flips around another direction and hurts somebody else or benefits somebody else. So you really never know. And humans aren't smart enough to figure out these secondary, tertiary, quaternary effects. It's that's just, we only figure that out like a decade later, like, oh yeah, no, we had no idea that doing this thing would actually cause this. And you can only see that in hindsight. Um so so yeah, I don't know. I think that's usually what happens is you usually cause more harm. And we're trying to get away from being warriors and being strong and everything like this. And maybe people had it figured out in the past. Maybe that's why things worked so well. So I don't know. On the one hand, you should try to fix the system to always try to make it better. But on the other hand, recognize that it worked and there's a reason it worked. And we don't know why it worked. Like,
Yeah.
people just figured
Yeah.
it out somehow. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like the complex way you described that there about how a second a second effect might come back and have the opposite effects, and a third one might happen that way too, and we just don't know. And I like talking with Mike Spencer Bound about this sort of thing sometimes too, because like you, he has traveled across the world, so he's seen a lot of different cultures, and he's seen what most often works and what most often seems to have good intentions but lead to negative consequences sometimes too. And yeah, like in the past there used to be more of this cultural encouragement to, be a warrior and toughen up and stuff like that. And yeah, maybe with progress some of that should be gotten rid of a little bit, but you don't want to get rid of that entirely, because the analogy that you were just using with working out, a little bit of exercise, especially, or even like a moderate amount of exercise on a regular basis, it can be good for you. You don't want to completely get rid of the idea of exercise because it's a way of causing you stress, because there can be positive stressors like you were talking about. And in terms of the unforeseen consequences, that's another thing that it reminds me of in the book, where the Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff mention the author and guy who, I forget what he does exactly. No, yeah, he's a statistician. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, in his book Black Swan that I read a while ago, where his whole idea is that we have these systems based on statistics and whatnot that kind of try to predict outcomes. But if you talk about something in the book, he talks about, if you take the example of 9/11, then that was a completely unforeseen event. And there are all of these events that he labels as black swans, which are basically the idea that a lot of people talk about, that are unknown unknowns. And you can't measure unknown unknowns because they're not known until they happen.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And then, I mean, we come up with all these theories and models and everything like this, but, we forget that in theory and practice are the same, but in practice, theory and practice are different.
Oh, that's a that's a perfect way of saying that. Yeah. Yeah, another I forget what the third one is, but the the second out of the three untruths that they go through in Coddling of the American Mind is another one that I try to constantly remind myself of, and that I notice all over the place in the culture now, and particularly in that people are good and evil. So you are and like Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book The Righteous Mind a lot, you think that you are righteous and you think that the person who opposes you or disagrees with you is evil. And we all tend to think this way because we have different moral values. So it's like it's such a damaging thing to just demonize people who disagree with you, and it can be really fucking difficult at time, and I feel that how difficult this is for me all the time. But you really want to, I think it's better for society to keep an open mind and remember that the person who disagrees with you or the person who you see as your enemy probably has understandable reasons for why they have different values and a different perspective on a particular issue than you do, which is why I love that they go into that concept in the book as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everybody's logical, even terrorists, and you'd be thinking the same way in their position if you had that same, foundation. Then you'd be doing the exact same thing. So we're all the same. I think Joe Rogan talks about this. Is like we're the same person. We got a different body, but we're the same person. So uh, yeah, it's kind of it's incredible once you see that. And I think travel is really good for that because you see so many different types of people and you don't understand what they're doing. You don't understand what they're saying. Like, why are you doing things this way? But you would do the same thing in their situation. So yeah, that's kind of a huge revelation, actually. That's kind of an amazing epiphany to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you brought up Joe Rogan there too, because he says all the time on his podcast, and that's one of the many reasons that I love his podcast, that when he sees someone who's done something bad or something like that, or who says something he disagrees with, he kind of thinks to himself, that could be me. It could easily be me. And that's the same case with anyone, as you were talking about. It's complete chance that we were born as ourselves instead of someone else. So an example of that on Joe Rogan's podcast that I just thought of was where he was interviewing this completely corrupt cop who went to jail for a number of years because of that, because he was literally doing exactly what you would expect from the popular narrative of a corrupt cop. He was stealing from people, he was stealing drugs, he was selling drugs to people on the side, and he went to prison for that. And he learned his lesson, and when he came out of prison, he made a documentary and he tried to spread the word of how easy it can be to become a corrupt cop. But one of the things that Joe Rogan was saying throughout that interview was, "Man, I don't hate you for that. That could have been me in that situation. If I'd gone through those circumstances, especially if I was that in that place in my development as an adult, like a dumb 20-year-old kid or something like that, I probably would have fucking gotten corrupt too."
Yeah, exactly. I think I know the one you're talking about, and it was kind of like, oh, and then this led to this, and then this led to this, and this led to this, and this led to this, and then obviously at that point you're a corrupt cop, but you started out pure, but where exactly in that, like, which step would I have not done? And it's like, well, all of those steps are kind of reasonable. Like, that's not completely like, no, that you just crossed the line, but yeah, it's a very interesting thing to think about. And you know, that's like the human situation. That's the human condition right there.
Exactly. Yeah, and you brought up terrorists too. Like it is completely understandable and logical if you really actually, I guess you probably can't really completely understand it unless you go through all the exact same life circumstances. But maybe you're growing up in a poor country, you see people struggling all around you, you see the imperialist Americans attack your country and they fuck everything up, and they cause these tribes of extremist Muslims to start going around killing each other. And one of these tribes, maybe in like Syria, for example, I've heard of this example before. They control the local area where you live in. So if and they come to where you live one day, and they basically give you the option to join them or they will kill your family in front of you. What the fuck would you do in that situation? Probably fucking join a terrorist group, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And that was honestly most of history until recently. The fact that you have to explain that and be like, guys, check this out. So there's this thing, you know, everybody before would have been like, yeah, man, that's life. Like that happened in the next village, you know, and that the fact that we think it's weird now is kind of a miracle, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's really important to remember. And I have to remind myself all of that all the time too. Like the it's very like what we think of, what we tend to think of anyway as modern Western culture is a very recent development in history, and things did not used to be that way for the majority of human history. And yeah, I've just that's just a really important thing to remember. And it's important to remember, as I'm sure you know, because you've traveled to so many different countries, that there are many different cultures and many different ways of doing things. That reminds me of what Jonathan, one part that Jonathan Haidt talks about in The Righteous Mind too, where he's talking about how he, I think he went to live with a family in India when he was writing that book, and he went into this situation with his kind of stereotypical liberal political mindset. So he was thinking that the way the way the caste system works there, that, for example, these women who would just silently bring food into the room where the men were eating and then leave, he would think, well, these women are definitely fucking oppressed, right? And and then when he was there, people were telling him to like stop saying thank you and you're welcome to his servants and stuff like that. But he slowly developed an understanding while he was living there that, generally speaking, people would tell him about how they really value their place in the caste system. Like the servants, they really think that they're doing an important duty, and the women in those scenarios do too. And very importantly, the other people in other places in the caste system, they look at those other roles with a lot of honor too, because they're playing their part in the culture.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I mean, I actually lived in India for 9 months, but you know,
Oh.
I never really thought of that. But it was very strange to me, and you know, I didn't understand. But that completely makes sense. Is, you know, we come in with our own way of thinking, and we're like, oh, this is the way the world works, and it's completely different. Um, yeah, yeah, it's very strange. It's kind of hard to get used to, and it really is. You have to think about it in a completely different way. So yeah, yeah, that's everything. That's life.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I bet that that is always important to remember, especially when you're traveling too. And yeah, like I think we all I think all people really, like, I feel myself getting into this mindset all the time too, and kind of have to like dial back and stuff. Like I I react to it's particularly social media and whatnot, like stuff like that, which is not necessarily representative of reality at all. But I'll see something that someone says, and then I'll just have this instant emotional reaction. And I'm getting better at controlling that and dialing it back, but I still fall victim to that sometimes, because I think, how the fuck could this person think that way? That makes no sense at all. But then I try to remind myself, oh, they've had a different life from my life, and they probably have different values, and they sure as fuck have a different perspective on life. So maybe if I really understood why it is that they have this perspective, maybe I would understand what it is that led to them having this perspective, which I try to remind other people of all the time when I see them getting like really tribal, like I said I get sometimes too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, that's the thing is they are coming from somewhere that's logical, and they are rational. But at the same time, especially if it's on social media, and this is what I've learned. This is actually honestly what I've avoided mixed mental arts a little bit, is it's just a time suck. Because at the same time, like, people post like, oh my God, did you see this thing that this one person posted? But that's obviously, that's the most extreme post. That's the most interesting post that somebody posted. And it's this 19-year-old, like, that doesn't know shit. And they're figuring out the world, and they're like, oh, I learned this thing, and then based on that, I'm gonna talk about this thing. And like, it's stupid. And they should be able to walk away from that, or not have that on their permanent record, and recognize that probably in 5 or 10 years they're going to be thinking something different, and they're going to have new evidence and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know, I kind of take it like that, like, this too will pass, like everything in the world, this too will pass. And you know that's kind of the point of social media, is to get your attention. And
Yeah.
that sure as hell gets your attention. So I don't know, like, recognize that, and fight it a little bit, or be like, okay, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to fall for that trap. Or this is like the most extreme of extremes, and not everyone is thinking this way. So yeah.
Yeah. And with social media and with the mainstream media, there's a financial incentive to cater to the most polarizing and extreme views. And then you can easily get caught up in the news cycle and just have just have the mindset like, holy shit, did you hear about this new thing? And then a few weeks later, you're outraged about some new thing, regardless of what side you're on, where right or left, red versus blue, up versus down, it doesn't matter. Like, it's people get tribal about it, but then they don't realize, and like I said, myself included, sometimes, that you're gonna forget about it in 2 weeks because there's gonna be some new thing to get outraged about.
Yeah, it's all kind of silly. It's all kind of pointless, just running around in a, what is it, hamster wheel, something like this. And what are you accomplishing anyways? What is like, what contribution do you have, and how are you going to change things? So I don't know. That's kind of the way I started looking at it. And it's like, okay, well, I'll focus on the stuff that I can fix and that I can change. And mostly that's my stuff. Like, mostly that's career or family or friends, or something like this. And that's the stuff that I can really have an influence on. The other stuff, what some 19-year-old thinks or says about gender fluidity, or whatever stupid thing, I don't know, like, that's not going to affect me. That's not going to, I don't know. And I'm not going to change the world in this way. So fuck
You
it.
mean focusing on improving yourself and doing really well at your own personal goals is a better idea than decimating someone on Twitter?
Believe it or not, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. So is there anything else you wanted to talk about there?
No, I think we've covered a lot of stuff, and this has been, I think we've set out and we've accomplished the goals that we set out with, talking about the AI and the languages, and kind of wherever that led us as well. So this was a fun conversation.
All right. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for talking, and yeah, hopefully we can talk again. And I always enjoy these conversations. And yeah, I'll just say what I like to say at the end of all of my videos here, and then you can give any plugs or whatnot you have there. I'll add the links for your podcast there, like I did with your last episode. So yeah, thanks everyone so much for watching and listening to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and hopefully Ladan did too. I know I had lots of mindgasms. Hopefully other people did too. And yeah, like I always say, thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed to my channel and or liked this video and or contributed to me on Patreon. And thank you so fucking much to anyone else who does all of those things, especially Patreon. I really fucking appreciate it. It helps me to have more time to do fun and awesome stuff like this. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right. Keep having mindgasms, everyone. And got any plugs, I know, for your podcasts and whatnot there?
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. Check me out on Travel Wisdom Podcast if you want to learn about travel and languages and mindsets and how travel can be not just a not just a vacation, but a learning experience. And Neural Implant Podcast if you're interested in implants, the science of those, and the leaps, the philosophy of it, the ethics, the talking to the leaders of this field. So it's definitely growing. I'm having a lot of fun with it. So check those out. Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Thanks, man. This was a lot of fun. And all right, everyone. So thanks everyone so much for watching, and adios until next time. Keep having mindgasms and mindgasming your ideas all over the place.